So, by now, you've probably all seen the video that Amir Khan did with IFL TV, probably a week, 10 days ago. Now, I'm slightly behind the curve here with my video on this. I appreciate this news has probably been covered more promptly and more accurately by other YouTube contributors. But I wanted to throw my hat into the ring on this news that Amir Khan spouted, that he heard that Kell Brook was fighting either Chris Van Heerden or Leonard Bundu. Let me say, I personally, despite initial scepticism, am inclined to believe Amir Khan. For a start, as we know, the welterweight division is very, there are a lot of huge names in that division at the top of the sport. Now, Kell's going to be fighting in October. We believe he's going to be fighting in Sheffield. As a result, there's going to be obviously a few people who are going to be unavailable for that date. An example being Floyd Mayweather, who is going to be fighting Andre Berto, another name who won't be available. There's the likes of Manny Pacquiao, Tim Bradley, Amir Khan. These guys are too big a names to get them over at shorter notice for an event in October. We know that the Brandon Rios fight appears to have fallen through. An announcement was due on that for a really extensive period of time and hasn't come through. You'll have read various rumours on boxing sites and forums that the fight's fallen apart and, it seems to be moving away from actually happening. Kell Brook himself looked, I must say, very overweight when I recently saw him on Sky Sports sitting ringside. He had quite a chin on him. He didn't look like he was anywhere near fighting shape. And for me, that's a big concern because for Kell Brook, we know he's very big at the weight. We know it is potentially quite an effort for him to cut down to 147. And for him to have to go through a fat camp and, spend some time losing that needless blubber, for want of a better word, kind of suggests that he's not going to be facing an opponent he's going to have to go life or death with. Kind of suggests that he's not just around the corner from a massive fight. So, all things put together, if you factor in who's actually available at 147 for that date, if you factor in the shape Kell Brook appears to currently be in, and if you factor in, what Amir Khan's been saying, it does seem very possible that the opponent will be the likes of a Leonard Bundu, that the opponent will be the likes of a Chris Van Heerden, or potentially someone of that ilk, someone of a similar level, outside of the top 15, inside of the top 30. Both of those guys kind of make sense. Eddie Hearn's worked with Bundu before. He's kind of known to the UK fans, having beaten Frankie Gavin, having beaten Lee Purdy. You've obviously got a Keith Thurman link there. Keith didn't stop Leonard Bundu. If Kell Brook was able to get the stoppage over him, would that look very good? Chris Van Heerden, I think he was scheduled to face Frankie Gavin previously, and Eddie Hearn cut the contract on him so that Frankie Gavin would be free to fight Kell Brook. So perhaps, they've got a business relationship. Perhaps Eddie Hearn is inclined to give Chris Van Heerden an opportunity, having rescheduled him previously. Both of those names worryingly kind of make sense and would tie in with the lack of big names available and would tie in with Kell Brook's current shape. Now, unfortunately, I think due to the programme that Matchroom have, where they have to fill certain spaces for Sky, perhaps where they have to sell various pay-per-view slots, they're going to need to move this fight forward for October the 24th. Now, one rumour, or I don't know if it's the 24th, but October. Now, one rumour I've heard is that Sky have got the rights for Tyson Fury Klitschko and will do a double-header pay-per-view with Kell Brook in Sheffield fighting a lesser opponent on pay-per-view, then going over for Klitschko Fury. And in many ways, that would kind of hide the fact that, Kell Brook was fighting a lesser opponent and would keep him on pay-per-view, because the majority of boxing fans are still going to be happy to pay the pay-per-view fee, given that the fight is headlined by Vladimir Klitschko and Tyson Fury. Now, I'll be one of those, regular viewers of the channel will know I'm a massive Fury fan. I'll be one of those who does buy the pay-per-view because of the Fury-Klitschko fight. However, what I would say is I think this is becoming detrimental to Kell Brook's career. I really do. I was charitable to Kell Brook when he fought Jojo Dan. Jojo Dan was his mandatory, although it should be noted that Jojo Dan, his mandatory wasn't due. He took that fight early to allow him for bigger fights later on in the year. So, I was a bit charitable with him there. I was also charitable with the Frankie Gavin fight. I said I like the fact it was keeping Kell Brook active. I like the fight, it was a domestic bust-up. I acknowledge neither of these fights were great fights, but I kind of gave reasons why you could excuse them on both occasions. But now, if it looks like the third fight on the bounce, will be, a Leonard Bundu or a Van Heerden, I think it's starting to border on inexcusable. And whilst I like to see Kell being active and keep getting run-outs, for me, his activity is now being a case to feed pay-per-view revenue as opposed to activity for activity's sake. Given the fact he's just faced two very lower level opponents, I'd actually rather see Kell out of the ring for another month and we wait for a bigger name opponent to come forward. An opponent who's going to be more of an entertaining fight, more of a challenge for Kell Brook. Because whilst activity is great, it's only great if it leads to something more. It leads to a bigger fight against a bigger name. And Chris Van Heerden, Leonard Bundu, you could make an argument that, that's in the wrong direction. I mean, Chris Van Heerden probably is a worse fighter than Frankie Gavin. It's arguable that it's getting worse. So I have major concerns about these fights. I don't like the fact that it seems that it's just there to feed pay-per-view activity. I don't like the idea that Kell Brook versus Chris Van Heerden is a pay-per-view co-main event. I don't like the fact that Kell will be so unmotivated by these fights that, he's blowing up between matches. And I also think we need to be realistic here, At this point, Kell Brook is not going to be fighting Floyd Mayweather. It's also clear that the Amir Khan fight is not going to happen. Now, whatever the rights and wrongs are of that situation, we could discuss for days, Khan's this, Khan's that. Irrelevant, really. The Khan fight is not going to happen. Let's accept that. Let's move on. Do I see Manny Pacquiao at this stage coming over to the UK to fight Kell Brook? Probably not. So, there's all these names out there. They're big names, but largely they're irrelevant names. Mayweather, Khan, Pacquiao, they're kind of irrelevant. They're kind of irrelevant because these fights are not going to happen. So let's focus on the fights that could happen. Tim Bradley, Sean Porter, Keith Thurman. I'm trying to think of more examples. Even the likes of Chris Algieri or Devon Alexander would be better than these guys, surely. I'm sure there's more names out there. Guys like perhaps an Adrian Broner, even a guy like Danny Garcia potentially. All of these names are there who are slightly below that top tier, who could help build Kell Brook into that top tier. But the truth is, Kell Brook is now 35-0. He's got the longest undefeated streak in British boxing, and he's only had one fight against a top 10 opponent. I see so much potential in Kell Brook. I see scope for him to join that elite tier with the Mayweathers of this world. And whilst activity is a good thing, and whilst keeping him active after an injury is a good thing, I'm disappointed by this fight, and I want to see more. As I say, this is actually a step down from Frankie Gavin, if true. I appreciate there may have been issues with the Brandon Rios fight, but for me, too much time has been spent bitching and moaning about the Khan situation. Yes, it's very annoying. Yes, it's very frustrating. But the fact of the matter appears to be that that fight is not going to happen. So let's park that issue for a separate conversation, and let's try and work out what can be done to get Kell in meaningful fights in 2015 that don't involve Amir Khan for now. That needs to be the thought process of Team Kell Brook, Team Eddie Hearn, Team Matchroom, Team Sky. And just putting him on Tyson Fury's undercard as a co-main event against Chris Van Heerden is weak, in my opinion. And it doesn't do anything to build Kell Brook to where he needs to be to get the super fights. To demand a 50-50 with Amir Khan. To put himself on Floyd Mayweather's radar. That's not there at the moment. Even a rematch with Sean Porter would be a more solid option. Positioning yourself with Danny Garcia if he beats Paulie Malignaggi. The list goes on. Anyway, that's my thoughts. A slightly disappointed Kell Brook fan here. Let's hope Amir Khan was wrong. That's always a possibility. For me, what he said does tie in with a few sets of circumstances. You've got to ask yourself, if Kell is fighting in October, I mean, we're coming up to one of the last days in July now, so we're in August, basically. No fight announced. Kell Brook looks very overweight. If he is fighting in October, it's probably not going to be against one of the premium guys. So I'm inclined to believe Amir Khan, and I'm inclined to be disappointed. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, would appreciate it if you like the video. Give me a thumbs up. Cheers.